Hello guys, welcome to my newest Templar build. I am calling this build the Berserker, and I'm calling it because it just fits this style of play that this build is. So what this Templar build is a DPS tank build. It is built for PvP, but it works great for PvE as well. I use it primarily in Imperial City, so as most Imperial City builds will be, they'll be great at both PvE and PvP. This build works by stacking damage over time effects on your targets to deal damage, heal over time effects, and a burst heal on yourself to keep yourself very hard to kill. A quick run over of it is that you build for very high damage and you rely on the passive mitigation from your heavy armor and the different kinds of build techniques using armor and passives to keep yourself alive. So this build will play primarily aggressive. You won't spend much time at all playing defensive with this setup. So it plays a very interesting style of tank. It's something that I've really enjoyed playing in PvP, and it's something that I've really enjoyed playing solo and in groups in PvP as well. This build has lots of group utility, which is something that I didn't really know until I had kind of taken it out in the group spin, and it was fantastic. So I'll jump right into it. Let's get started. Alright, so let's look at my character stat page here. You can see I've dumped everything into stamina and have quite a high maximum stamina value. This is fairly important to the build. Part of this build is to get your maximum stamina as high as possible, as well as get your weapon damage as high as possible. My maximum health is doing pretty decent at 21.5k. I am outside of Cyrodiil right now, so I'm missing out on about 5,000 health. Now, keep in mind that this maximum stamina value is affected by how many champion points I have. I have a champion rank right now of 361, so this will be different for you depending on how many champion points you have. It could be higher or lower. So if we look at my regens here, they are quite low, and that's not normally something that I run in a build, but for this build it actually works to have the low regens for it, and I'll explain that as we get into the build and I talk about the skills and the gear that I use. So I'm sitting at 3,050 weapon damage buffed. This build doesn't use Flawless Dawnbreaker. Of course you could throw Flawless Dawnbreaker on if you want a little bit more weapon damage, and then finally I've got 26% weapon critical, and if I buffed the major crit buff, which this build does have, I'll be sitting at 36% weapon crit. And then when I swap to my bow, I've got 2753 weapon damage, and then 31.6 weapon crit, and that's 41.6 weapon crit after the buff. So my spell resistance and my physical resistance are fairly decent, but they're not too terribly high. I don't run the major armor and major ward buff for this build, but it is optional to run if you want to. It would just make you more tankier. And then finally, I am a stage 4 vampire. So that comes with all the goodies that being a vampire does. I have the lower health regeneration. I take 25% more damage from fire attacks. But on top of that, I get the awesome vampire passives of having the bonus to my stamina and magicka regen. And of course, I have reduced incoming damage when my health drops below 50%. My boon for this build is the warrior boon, which increases my weapon damage. And then finally, the consumable that I use is the max health and max stamina increasing V15 food. So the gear for this build is fairly straightforward. I start off with a 5-piece reactive, which takes up my helm, chest, boots, my legs, and my gloves. Now, these are all different traits because it is tough to get all the traits that you kind of want for your gear, and getting a bunch of V16 gear is tricky, as well as because it is quite expensive and hard to find. So I still am wearing 2 V15 pieces here, but that's okay. It's not such a big deal. All my gear is enchanted with maximum stamina, except this one piece, but that should be max stamina. I just never got around to fixing the enchant on it. I would say for your enchants on your gear, for your big pieces, which would be your helmet, your chest, and your legs, see if you can get infused or divines on those for this build. And then for all the little pieces, go for divines if you can get your hands on them. If you can't get your hands on infused or divines, of course, just use whatever else you can get. So I use the reactive set for this build because it reduces your incoming damage when you are stunned by 35%. Now, I'll talk a little bit about how that stacks up with my other damage reductions later on. So the next set that I'm using is 3-piece of the Night Mother. So I've got that on my arm cops here, on my belt, and then I've got a Greatsword of the Night Mother, and then on swap I've got the Bow of the Night Mother. So this is a great set. It's a crafted set. It's quite an easy crafted set. I believe it's a 2-trait crafted set. Very easy to get your hands on. and it gives you weapon critical and weapon damage for the 2 and 3 slots. And for my jewelry, I've got a 3-piece Shadow Walker set. Now, all of my enchants on this set are weapon damage, and this is something that is up to you. As I became more comfortable playing it, I was able to put more weapon damage on the build and take more of my stamina regen off. So what I had originally had here was stamina recovery, and I ended up taking that off and replacing it with weapon damage. So I'd recommend, if you're just trying to start out with a lower regen build similar to this one, I would say sit around 1,000 stamina recovery and work your way down from there. Dropping your stamina recovery can be beneficial, as you'll be able to hit way harder, especially once you start giving up all your regen for damage. But of course you lose out on the regen in the end. So it makes your build harder and harder to play. So keep that in mind when playing this build. If you find that you're not sustaining as well as you can, switch out some of your weapon damage glyphs for stamina recovery glyphs, and that's how you can kind of directly make changes to the playstyle of this build, is through your glyphs on your jewelry here. And then finally, I've got a Sharpened Greatsword to deal that extra damage against my armored foes, and then I've got a Crusher enchant as well on theirs. And then on the bow, I've got weighted. And the reason that I've got weighted on the bow is because the heavy attacks are so important for this build. You have to channel those bow heavy attacks whenever you can. And when you do, make sure that you get them off on a target. Don't just fire it at nothing. It's a big part of the sustain for this build, is being able to get those bow heavy attacks off. Alright, so let's take a look at the skills that I use for this build. Of course, the passives that I'm going to use are all applicable passives to Templar, to heavy, light, and medium armor, excluding the 5 pieces for light and medium armor, and the passives towards my Vampirism, my Greatsword, and my bow, and whatever else that you can get on your character to make your character more powerful. So, the first skill on my Greatsword bar that I've got is Executioner, and I've got it on my Greatsword for the obvious reason of it being my Execute. It is a very powerful Execute, and it is a mainstay of a Greatsword, I believe. While slotted, your two-handed abilities will deal 18% extra damage to low health targets, and this will include your heal as well on yourself. And my next skill on my bar is Critical Rush. Now, I love Critical Rush, and I was in between Critical Rush and Stampede for this build, as it is a tankier build, but I was able to get fairly decent DPS with it, so I thought I'll stick with Critical Rush and I'll enjoy the bonus damage that skill gives me. Of course, if you want to switch to Stampede, it's always up to you. Stampede would work well for it with the snare, but Critical Rush is just better overall, I believe, between the two skills, because you just can't say no to that extra damage. Now, the next skill that I've got on my bar right now is Carve. Now, I've played with Brawler and Carve, and both are very good. Brawler's really good because of the shield it gives you, and that is definitely something that contributes to being tanky, is getting that shield from Brawler. But Carve is also great because the ult that I'm using is Empowering Sweep, which will reduce my incoming damage by a percentage as well. And what Carve does is it helps you build ultimate. So it's up to you how you kind of want to play it. Both will make you more tanky and more effective, but they just kind of do it in a different way. Carve will allow you to bust out more ultimates, whereas Brawler will give you that shield when you hit a bunch of targets. So it's up to you on which one of the two-handed skills you want to use here, but that dot is so powerful, and it works so well for cleaning up. When you got 2 or 3 people on you, the AoE is always nice as well. And then the heal that I've got on this build is Rally, which gives you the Major Brutality buff, increasing your weapon damage by 20%, and it gives you that awesome heal over time, as well as that big burst heal when you reuse Rally after casting it. The last regular skill on my bar here is Accelerating Drain. I've gone with Accelerating Drain in this patch because of how they reworked the skill. The only thing that's kind of different about the skill now is that if something's already stunned, you're still allowed to cast the Drain on them. So the Drain also had its range increased by a decent amount as well, so it's got a 12-meter range. So the way that I use this Drain is kind of like a really quick stun. You can animation cancel the Drain to hit your target, and what it'll do is it'll stun your target instantly, and you can catch them in dodge rolls, etc., as this is an undodgeable stun. Now, the tricky part about using this drain is that it can be a little difficult to aim, especially on a target that's moving around a lot. And finally, the drain is going to give me Minor Expedition, increasing my movement speed by 10% for 20 seconds. And then, of course, I've got my bow on my offhand. So between this drain and my bow, I've got both Minor and Major Expedition buffs, allowing me to increase my movement speed by a total of 50%. And finally, the ultimate that I've got is Empowering Sweep, as I mentioned before. So what the sweep does is it'll deal a large amount of magic damage to all nearby enemies, and then an additional 3,000 magic damage every 2 seconds for 6 seconds. So the additional damage kind of works in a pulse on your character, and it'll pulse out around you. This ultimate will also reduce the incoming damage dealt to you by 15% for 8 seconds, plus an additional 4% for each enemy hit. So this is a great tanking ultimate. Stack these damage reductions with the 35% I get from Reactive, the 6% I get from being ignored, and then finally up to 30% that I can get from the Undeath Vampire passive. I get quite a tanky setup, especially when I'm busting out this ult and hitting a bunch of targets with it. Now, the one downside to using Empowering Sweep that I seem to mind or seem to have trouble with is that it has a very, very small radius. It has a 5-meter radius. Now, it is an AoE, but 5 meters is not a lot of space for an AoE to hit, especially in this game. Now, it's not such a big deal, as you'd get a huge amount of the damage reduction if you hit nothing anyway, but I have more than once missed my Empowering Sweep ult on my targets, and it really sucks to miss it, especially when it's going to get you that kill. So keep in mind when using this ult that you need to hug your opponent. Alright, so on my bow bar, I've got Poison Injection as my first skill. Poison Injection is just an awesome bow move. It'll put a deadly damage over time effect on your opponent. Of course, the damage over time will increase as your opponent loses health once under 50% health, and once they drop lower and lower, that damage over time will tick for deadly amounts. So you can't go wrong with dotting up someone with Poison Injection. The next skill that I've got on my bar is Blazing Spear. Now this is a Magicka-based skill, which deals magic damage, and you're probably wondering why I've got it on my bar if I'm not a Magicka-based build. Well, the reason that I have it on my bar is because Blazing Spear doesn't actually do that much magic damage. The damage over time is what I kind of wanted from the Blazing Spear, and the magic damage that it does from the damage over time on the tooltip itself is only 177. If I was running a Magicka-based build, I could maybe get that up to 1k if I was really glassy. But I'm not a Magicka-based build, and it wouldn't even be that much damage even if I was. The reason that I'm running it is because that field can trigger your Burning Light passive. Gives you a 25% chance to cause an extra 3,000 magic damage anytime you hit with an Aedric Spear ability. Now, this Burning Light passives will scale off of your maximum magicka or your maximum stamina, depending on which one is better. So, I'm a stamina-based build, I get awesome Burning Light from being a stamina-based build, and that will apply directly to my Blazing Spear, allowing me to throw down that big field where people can take those big Burning Light ticks. And then the next skill on my bar is Resolving Vigor. Vigor was moved up to Alliance Rank 5. Hooray, hooray! Now, getting to Support 5 isn't too hard. You can actually do it before you even vet a character. You can have, you could have as low as a level 40 running around with Vigor, and that would be fairly easy to get, actually, in PvP if you just go in there for a few hours every day. So that is nice now that Vigor is much easier to get than it used to be. Vigor works really well for this build because this build has bonuses from running on low health. And what I mean by that is I get a bonus to the amount of damage mitigation that I have as my health drops. Vigor, being a heal over time, isn't going to spike heal my health back up to huge amounts. So what that allows me to do is tank on low hit points. And I know that sounds almost kind of silly, but tanking on low hit points can be beneficial if you learn to do it right. And then the next skill in my bar, of course, is Purifying Ritual. Purifying Ritual being that awesome Purify, remove 5 harmful effects from yourself, including snares. That's right, Templars can be so immune to snares, which is a huge problem for a lot of players in PvP right now. Thank God I'm a Templar. And then finally, the last skill on my bar is Repentance. Now, Repentance scales off of your maximum magicka or your maximum stamina, and it scales off of 10% of that value. So, having a high amount of maximum stamina allows me to get a big, beefy Repentance off of whatever is dead. Now, Repentance is so powerful for this build. This build I've been playing a lot of, especially in Imperial City where you have lots of bodies. Repentance will keep your stamina bar full. Repentance also works really well because it buffs everyone in your group as well. You're going to be healing people with it, and it turns you into a great utility Templar. Between Repentance and Blazing Shield, your friendlies that you're running with should never complain about running out of stamina, and if they do, tell them not to be lazy and pick up more of your shards. And finally, my ultimate is Devouring Swarm. Being a tankier build, Devouring Swarm, of course, was the natural choice for my ultimate. It is incredibly powerful. You can use it to AFK tank if you want. Just activate your swarm and let people just kick the crap out of you, stun you, CC you, and you'll just sit there and they will not be able to touch you. It is such a powerful ultimate. Keep in mind, though, that it does have quite a high cost, and of course it comes at the price of making your character a vampire. Alright, so let's jump right into the champion tree. Of course, if you guys don't have as many champion points as me, or if you have more champion points than me, and you wanted to kind of follow the build, just kind of put your points in the same kind of distribution, and you should be okay. So we're going to start in the tower tree. So I've got 25 in Warlord, reducing the stamina cost of my abilities. I've got 1 in Magician, 1 in Sprinter, and 1 in Bashing Focus. The reason that I've put 1 in Magician, Sprinter, and Bashing is because they do affect my build in a very minimal way, as I do sprint, I do use magic spells, and I do bash, but not often. So just 1 point for the 1% bonus I felt was plenty. In my Lover tree, I've got 5 in Mooncalf, increasing my stamina recovery by a small amount, 1 in Arcanist, and 1 in Healthy, just to get the 1% bonuses off of those, and then 10 in Tenacity, increases the amount of magicka and stamina that your heavy attacks restore by 4%. And if you remember earlier, we are running a weighted bow, so this does come in handy. And then finally, my Shadow tree. Now, remember that I am wearing a reactive set of gear, so I've got 50 points in Elusive. Reduce the duration of all snare, fear, and disorient effects on you by 14.9%. So putting a bunch of points in the Elusive passive and having the reactive set allows me to kind of run a double wall against stuns, where I don't have to spend any resources mitigating or breaking any CC. And then I've got 25 in Tumbling. Now this is mostly for the dodge roll, as I do like to dodge roll quite a bit. But the break free is useful because sometimes you're going to want to break free even if you're wearing a reactive set. Times like this are going to be when you realize that the incoming damage that you're about to take while laying down, you won't be able to survive. So you break free and you block, or you break free and hold your block button. I say that just because if someone hits you in that split second after you break free and you follow it with a dodge roll, you'll just take full damage. So once you break free, hold down that block button and roll away. And that's kind of how I've been using it. Keep in mind that it's not very often that you're going to have to break free when using a reactive set. It's just kind of when you find that your incoming burst is going to be too much for you to handle. Alright, so in my apprentice tree, I have 29 in Blessed and 1 in Elfborn. So 29 in Blessed to increase my healing received. I have a lot of heals on this build. I've got Rally, Vigor, and Purifying Ritual going for it. Now, having increased healing power is just going to be so beneficial to having all those heals on me at the same time. On top of that, this also gives me the Spell Precision passive, which increases my spell critical by 12%. The reason that I felt this passive was kind of worth getting was because of my Purifying Ritual. When I throw Purifying Ritual down, I still would like to have a little bit of critical percent chance on it, as all the incoming heals that I can get matter. In my Atronach tree, I've got 12 in Bow Expert and 10 in Blade Expert. So this increases the light and heavy attacks of my bows and my swords and two-handed swords. So this is just to kind of buff up my light and heavy attacks. As I said before, they are very important to this build, and you'll find yourself channeling a lot of them, especially with the low regen. And then finally, I've got 34 in Mighty, 21 in Piercing, and 12 in Precise Strikes. And I've kind of done a 3-2-1 pattern with these. And this is just to kind of bulk up my physical damage. Of course, this will bulk up my stamina-based heals as well, because they are based off of my physical damage also. And putting the points in this tree has given me access to Perfect Strike, which increases your weapon critical rating by 12%. This is such an important passive for a stamina-based build. Once you get your first 90 champion points, this is where you want to invest if you're running a stamina-based build. I would say this is one of the most important passives for this build, if not the most important passive that you get from the champion tree. So this is the first one that you guys kind of want to work towards. Alright, so let's go on to my red tree. So I've got 30 in the Steed, 15 in Spell Shield, increasing my spell resistance, 12 in Resistant, reducing the amount of damage I take from critical hits, and 3 in Block Expertise. I don't block very often, but I do block sometimes as I am in Heavy, and I do get that bonus to my block cost. So I thought dumping a few points in here wouldn't hurt. And then the Spell Shield and Resistant is just to kind of bulk up your build. The important passive that you get from this tree is going to be Phase. After dodge rolling, your armor is increased by 660 for 3 seconds. It's not really a super powerful passive, but it's quite useful. Alright, so in the Lady tree, I've got 28 in Elemental Defender, 14 in Hardy, and 14 in Thick-Skinned. I've dumped a lot in Elemental Defender as I am a vampire, and reducing the incoming fire damage is very important. The 14 in Hardy will reduce my incoming magic, poison, and disease damage. That's awesome. That just makes me kind of a spell tank. And then the Thick Skin reduces the damage that I take from damage over time effects by 6.2%. Now this includes damage over time effects such as Radiant Destruction. So if you don't like Radiant Destruction, you will take less damage from it if you invest in this passive. That's something that I didn't realize until a friend of mine had told me. So I decided that investing points in here would be a good idea. Templars do purge a lot, so it was something that I had kind of avoided earlier, as I was always thinking, oh well, I don't really get hit by damage over time stuff because I do purge. But this will also affect the first tick of the dot as well, so it never hurts to put a few points in here also. And finally, in the Lord tree, I've got 23 in Quick Recovery, 10 in Heavy Armor Focus, and 1 in Nourishing. I decided to throw 1 in Nourishing for the effect to my potions. Of course, the 6.6% bonus to my healing, so important, as I am running quite a few heals. And then finally, you can't go wrong with a little bit of extra damage from Heavy Armor Focus.
Alright guys, so let's talk a little bit about the damage mitigation of this build and how it kind of works. So the idea behind this build was to put on heavy armor and kind of use it as sort of a passive damage mitigation, so I can play as aggressively as possible and not have to worry too much about my hit points dropping too quickly. As you can see here, I am fairly tanky. It's not too difficult for me to just kind of face tank 2 players, but then I do get jumped by quite a few players here, and I wanted to use this clip because I get beat on a lot. I don't necessarily get an awesome clip here or many kills, but I like this clip because I get beat on a lot, and it just kind of shows just how tanky you can be. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's making me so tanky here. Number 1, I'm a Nord. Nord gets 6% reduced incoming damage as one of their racial bonuses, which is awesome. Of course, I am a vampire as well, so once my health drops below 50%, I will take up to 30% reduced incoming damage as it gets lower and lower. I am wearing the reactive set, which I had mentioned earlier, and that will reduce my incoming damage by 35% when I'm stunned, and then you see me using Empowering Sweep as often as I can to stay alive here. So in this fight here, all I'm really doing is I'm just casting my heals over time, running around these pillars to try to kite as much attention off of me as I can, and just letting these guys beat on me. This isn't a fight that I know I can win at any time soon, so all I'm doing is just relying on the tankiness of my build to just kind of stay alive and fight these DC as long as I can, protect my 600 stones, and I end up dying right there. But I think that was a great clip just to kind of showcase the kind of tankiness that you can achieve with this kind of build.
Okay, so let's jump into the PvP commentary. So I'm going to start off with just a quick clip here, just showing a little bit of burst with this build, and a little bit of the kind of aggressive rotations that you're going to use with it. All right. So I engage with this AD group here. I put a poison injection into said, trying to put a little bit of damage into him, and he ends up backing off. And I see a Templar who's trying to finish off the mob here with the Radiant. Of course, I go in as fast as I can, go for my ult and bash, and I take him down really quick. And then this guy continues to pressure me. I get a really great stun right there with my Vampire Drain skill. You see, he doesn't even see it coming, and I managed to almost get him there. I close into him and finish him off. You see my dots just doing so much work to him. This guy starts soul striking me at point blank. I quickly bash it, and he backs up, and he's just channeling his heavy attacks. I think he's pretty low on Magicka, but 2 more DC come in, and of course I'm getting the Radiant Beams on me. I quickly gap close into that AD, not only using him to get away, but I get the kill as well. And I decide to break away from the group just a little bit here, as I am pretty low on stam. Of course there's a backpack to loot, must take my backpacks. So I see the AD with his health starting to drop. I go in for the crit rush. The DC is also attacking him, so he drops really fast. And then I'm left to fight these 2 DC. I'm still low on stam, so I decide to pull around behind this barricade. I drop a Blazing Spear on their side of the barricade because I don't want them to use the barricade in the same way that I can. The Sork backs up because he doesn't want to jump too close to my spear, and the Stam Sork engages me. I continue to fence him, of course stunning him as often as I can with my Vampire Drain, keeping him CC'd. And I managed to put enough pressure into him that he doesn't CC break it in time, and I get the execute there. And this Sork just ends up running off, and that is the end of this fight.
Alright guys, so this is a fun little clip that I had. I get in a 1v4 against these guys here. They just finished cleaning up some of the mobs here, and I see them, so I attack them right away. I go for the first target I see, which is the V12 there. And then I figure out something awesome right at the beginning of the fight. There's a lot of Templars in this fight. I think there's 3 other Templars, and they are not about to let their team die easily. Now what's going to be really important in this fight is going to be to pick my target and my timing of my burst well. I have a full bar of stamina, so I'm just kind of going to tease this group as much as I can, rotate around them, try to deal a little bit of damage, and just wait to see if someone's health drops. The V15's health starts to drop there, and I try to go in for the kill, but of course the Templars are too quick for it, and they get the heals off on him. And that just did not work out for me. I did get a Nova dumped on me as well, so my kite area kind of got taken away from me there. And as soon as the Nova goes away, I decide to back up a little bit again and continue to use these pillars here, as they are being excellent for mitigating the amount of damage that these guys can do to me just by line of sight alone. I continue to try to fight these guys. I'm trying to get the stuns off with my Drain, but 2 of the Templars are running Sword and Shield, which makes it so hard to get the stuns off. One of them decides to go take care of a little bit of the mobs over to the side. I continue to fight these 3, but they're just killing the mobs off faster than I can do anything to these guys. They're so tanky. I get an awesome burst in there with my empowering sweep, and they just did not see it coming. You see the Templar pumps out a few heals there, and it's just too late. The friend's already dead. So now my objective in this fight, knowing that I have Templars around me, is to kind of just continue to keep the attention on me and not let them res their friend. None of them are going for the res, which they should have in this situation. Whenever you're in a fight and you outnumber your opponent, if one of your friends die, always pick them up right away. And of course, what ends up happening here is they split up, which is not the best decision. They leave this poor guy here to fight me alone, and I deal with him pretty quickly, and the other 2 end up running away. So that fight was great just for the movement and the kind of survivability and the weight with your burst. You do have a good amount of burst with this setup, but it's all about patience and timing when using it. Okay, guys, thank you so much for staying with me for this half an hour. If you guys made it through the whole build, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you guys learned something, maybe got some ideas for your own builds. Who knows? I know that watching build videos, maybe not necessarily to copy a build or anything, but just watching it to see what other players are doing is always interesting. As always, guys, all the links that you will need are in the description. I've got links to the build on ESO Head, as well as some information on the build at the bottom of the page there if you just want to skip through it and watch the PvP commentary. I know that some people like to do that. Thank you for coming again, and if you guys like what you saw, feel free to hit that like and subscribe buttons, and hopefully I'll see you guys again soon.